Welcome to my CyberSecurity Talk show. I am LorenMJ, and I will be your host. I can be found on Twitch under LorenMJ, also YouTube, LorenMJ, and on Twitter, LMJ_OU. So please give me a follow, give me a like, view my content, and comment. So, to begin with, we are going to cover our outline of how I usually do things. First of all, I like to cover listener feedback, if I have any, and being episode 2, I have some. Let's also, after that, talk about the news, and I'll do a session on news and commentary. That is probably the largest section. Beyond that is a how-to, where I cover some lessons learned, lessons on cybersecurity. I'll briefly cover one aspect of cybersecurity. Following that, I do a website or tool of the week. So, at this point, let's get started. Let's cover listener feedback. One of the things that came to my attention on YouTube was a comment that someone left. This comment was, I venture to say, the perfect comment. Wonderful listener feedback that I really never even had anticipated. And it was by a user named Pasta Breaker. And that person, whoever that is, he, she, I'm not sure, but they had very specific things as far as feedback goes. Overall, very positive, but also very specific ways that I could change to be able to make improvements. Now, I have taken that feedback, and I have done every single thing in there to try to make the improvement. So, one of the things was that I was too quiet, and I completely agree. I listened to it later, and yes, anything other than a very extremely quiet room, could you hear me? You could not hear me unless you had that extremely quiet room. So, what I did was I dusted off the old mic that I used to use because it had a more richer sound to it, although it did require that I crank it up and also crank up the gain and then also get very, very close to the microphone. And that's what I am doing right now. I am extremely close to the microphone. I've also, just to add more to it, I have increased my volume. Just personally trying to speak louder, as if I am not talking to the wall in front of me, but talking beyond the wall in front of me to others. And I know at this point, given how viewership is kind of low right now, I realize that I am mostly speaking to a recording or to people that are watching this as a recording. In any case, I appreciate you watching. And feel free, if you are watching later, after the episode was created, feel free to come by on Twitch and give me a follow and turn on the notifications so that you will get a notification when I do go live. So there, I will take your feedback immediately. If you do a comment or such, we will discuss things right there. So if you ever had any cybersecurity questions, that would be the time to bring it up. Or even if it's on a comment on perhaps the particular article we're talking about at the moment. We certainly grow by dialogue. So that's the idea. That was the feedback, and the only piece of feedback that I had, but it was beautifully done. Normally you get trolls on the internet that just want to badmouth everything, but this person was very positive and also practical. Very pragmatic changes that I could make with instructions even on what I might be able to do to improve the stream. So for that, I thank you. Let's move on. So now we're going to go to the news and commentary. To cover the news and commentary, what I want to do is introduce my desktop here. And for that to happen, I got to go here. Okay, so here we go. This first bit of commentary, or this first bit of cybersecurity news, these are, articles I find interesting, right? They may not be what you find interesting, but I find them interesting. As a cybersecurity analyst with 30 years experience in cybersecurity, I find some things interesting. And this I found interesting. Now, this is from The Atlantic by a writer named Anya Prince, and it is entitled, "I Tried to Keep My Pregnancy Secret." This article is about privacy. The author, Prince, is a professor, and they study technology and how it affects privacy. So I found this particularly interesting for that reason. So what she says in here is that she did all she could to hide the fact that she had gotten pregnant. Now, a lot of couples do this, and the reason they do it is for very personal reasons. For example, they may not be able to continue the pregnancy. So that could be deeply disturbing, a little rough, emotionally a roller coaster. So she did her best to not only keep it from friends and family, but tried to keep it from her technology. So she avoided what she called, I thought interesting, femtech products. Things like apps that are for period tracking, things of that nature. She did not necessarily avoid websites, for example, like when she was going to research something. She did not completely avoid them, but when she went to those places, she tried to be diligent about using a VPN. She also, at the start of this, points out her reasoning, and one of them was because of, inspiration she got from a famous example of an article in the New York Times magazine where Target had identified pregnant shoppers based on their purchases and then lumped them into this category of potentially pregnant. They would buy things like unscented lotions, vitamins, and cotton balls. So you can imagine someone going down an aisle in Target and looking at prenatal vitamins. Are they pregnant? She admittedly did her best to use tactics like using a VPN and non-tracking search engines, which, good for you. You should use those all the time. But she did have to do things. She had to go get prenatal vitamins and pregnancy tests. But she tried her best to pay in cash, and she did not use loyalty or reward programs for the points or the whatever you may get. But eventually, she was found out. It wasn't long before she was sitting on her couch scrolling through social media when she saw it. An advertisement for diapers. Now, how did she get caught? Well, she admits she doesn't know what happened. Perhaps she forgot a VPN one time when searching online, maybe? Or was it the time she had to use her credit card to buy something? It could have tipped them off. But here's the ultimately disturbing thing about this, is that it has real-world consequences. And we're not talking about violations of HIPAA. We're talking about a person that got those advertisements. In other words, the advertisements started. So she'd slipped up, and they started showing her advertisements for diapers 1 week after the pregnancy was lost. So here she is looking at advertisements with smiling babies, happy families, children giggling from now on through the days following and weeks after the loss. What an unbearable situation, compounded by the already emotionally distressing situation. And what happened? We have HIPAA, right? Right? Certainly we do. However, you also, not only do you agree to HIPAA, but you also agree to the many hundreds, if not thousands, of terms of use for all the products that you own and use, even the apps that you use. They are all writing lawyer speak for pages and pages and pages to make sure that they can bury it in there somewhere where they can use your data. So despite attempts by the FTC and others to keep this information out of the hands of companies, it still makes it there through the unclear, the use of these particular policies and contracts that you're making between you and your apps. Ultimately, what can you do? It is a lofty goal to try to maintain privacy, but we cannot give up. Do your best to maintain your privacy. And that's about all you can do, right? But don't give up. Don't give up. Giving up would be saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'll just go ahead and do everything I've always done and never actually go through your phone and make the changes to remove the camera and microphone from certain apps that are not entitled to it. For example, why does a shopping list app need your camera? Why does it need to listen to your voice? If you never do anything but type in your shopping list, why would you ever need to enable the voice or your microphone on that particular app? Why? So go through there and disable it. Our next article, speaking of privacy, is Google engineers joked about how incognito mode isn't very incognito. This is by Frank Landymore from Futurism.com. Now, what does this have to do? This is where, back in May, Google was sued for misleading the public about how this incognito mode works. I bring this up because of one detail that came out in this court session, and it was basically these jokes between engineers. So there's an email from the Google marketing chief, Lorraine Toohill, who sent an email to the CEO, Pichai? Anyway, he said in this email, make incognito mode truly private. We are limited in how strongly we can market incognito because it's not truly private. We need to use really fuzzy hedging language that is almost more damaging. So in other words, we need to really fix this because it's a joke. So it does. It shows that Google engineers clearly think of this mode as a joke. One Chrome engineer wrote in a 2018 group chat to his colleagues, I guess this also came out as part of the suit, we need to stop calling it incognito and stop using a spy guy icon. Another engineer linked to a wiki page of a character on The Simpsons called Guy Incognito, who looks exactly like Homer Simpson if he was dressed in a bad disguise. So the bottom line here is the final end of this hasn't been set yet. There's still a final date on the trial, but it could potentially unveil what kind of data that companies like Google can store, even if using something that you think is private, like an incognito mode. So hopefully we will see something come out of that. Our next article is from Bleeping Computer by Bill Tolles. We'll hear from him a couple times today. The title of it is Interpol Arrests Black Axe Cybercrime Syndicate Members. 70 were arrested by Interpol as part of a Black Axe cybercrime syndicate responsible for about $1.8 million in fraud. So Interpol also said that this is due to the anti-money laundering rapid response protocol mechanism that they have developed and are starting to use in the first time, called Operation Jackal. This article I highlight just for the purpose of finally some success, right? Finally some success. 70 people were arrested, breaking up basically this cybercrime syndicate, and those responsible. Now, do they get everybody? Not necessarily all the time, but it can deter. Some think of themselves as so anonymous that they can keep committing these acts of blatant violation of laws, just simply, unimpeded. But it's good to see things like this so that there's at least some deterrence out there. Along these lines, let's go to our next article, which talks about, this also comes from Bleeping Computer, and I don't know how to say this name, and I'm sure I'm going to screw it up. Sergiu Gatlan, I'm going to guess, but I don't know. Student jailed for hacking female classmates' email Snapchat accounts. So here, once again, is a success, right? So a student was jailed for this. This is a former student of the University of Puerto Rico, UPR, that spent 13 months in prison for hacking over a dozen emails and phishing and spoofing schemes that were put on female colleagues. In other words, schemes that he tried against female colleagues. He hacked into multiple university email accounts, collected personal information using spoofing and phishing. These are terrible crimes that people should not get away with. They have real-world outcomes that are terrible. Suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder. Not to mention just the fear, anger, depression, the thoughts of retaliation and violence that could actually happen from this. So there are real-world outcomes to the damaging things that happen when people are hacked or spoofed or phished. So it's not just money. And I highlighted this article just to be able to say that. Moving on to our next article. This is by the vendor named Fortinet. They make firewall switches, routers, that sort of thing. So they are, in this article, this is from Bleeping Computer, also by the same author, Sergiu Gatlan. Fortinet urges admins to patch bug with public exploit immediately. Now, the reason they're putting so much urgency to this is there's a bit of a story here. There's a critical authentication bypass in 3 products: FortiOS, FortiProxy, and FortiSwitch Manager. They have a vulnerability. This vulnerability has a CVE number. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah, here it is right here. So here's the CVE number if you want to look it up. But this has been released. So it's been out in the public for a while. 1 week later, Horizon3.ai security researchers shared a proof of concept exploit and an analysis for this vulnerability. So think about this. 1 week after they have released this vulnerability, there is now researchers have provided a proof of concept exploit and the root cause analysis. At the end of that week, on the Friday, after the exploit code was released, Fortinet issued a public warning asking customers to patch this actively exploited security flaw. Here is the company's warning. It says, after multiple notifications from Fortinet over the past week, there are still a significant number of devices that require mitigation, and following the publication by an outside party of proof of concept code, there is active exploitation of this vulnerability. So the results were confirmed. Gray noise and bad packets actually confirmed that this exploit was seen in the wild. People are scanning for and attempting to exploit this. So here we are within a week. So it gives you pause to know that those 0 days are very important. There are some workarounds. They basically require disabling the HTTP, HTTPS administrative interface, or at least going in and limiting the IP addresses that can be used to administrate using a local policy. So basically you go to each of these boxes and you establish a local policy that no one can connect to the administrative interface except from certain IP addresses that are internal. So that is the way to protect yourself if you cannot do an upgrade. However, upgrades need to happen. That needs to be put in your change control immediately and scheduled. Very likely, these are going to require reboots of very sensitive equipment So you just have to do it. Let's go to the next article. It is also by Bleeping Computer, by author named Lawrence Abrams. This is about an ransomware called Venus. It appears to have begun operating in the middle of August 2022, and it is now gained some notoriety. It gets into victims' computers through the corporate network using Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, so frequently called RDP. The Venus ransomware will attempt to terminate 39 processes, and these processes are usually database servers, Microsoft Office. It will also delete event logs, it'll delete shadow copy volumes, and it will disable data execution prevention services so that it can operate. And it will also do some renaming of files as it encrypts each file. Unlike last week where we talked about a fake ransomware which just renamed files, this one renames the file, but it also does encrypt it successfully. The ransomware will add a good gamer file marker inside the file and other information at the end of the file. It will also put a ransom note in your temp folder, which you can access by hitting the Windows key and then typing in %temp%, and then hit enter, and it will open your temp folder. And in there will be an HTA ransom note. So look there for that ransom note if you've been infected. That will confirm your infection. As always, contact the authorities if you've been infected. How does this happen? Well, how can you prevent this? Honestly, and I think this is basically the end of this page. It does talk about this. It basically says no remote desktop services should really be publicly exposed to the internet. You really should go through VPN, and this VPN should have multi-factor authentication. So after you've authenticated yourself using multi-factor, now you're on your VPN. Now you should be able to remote desktop into some of your services that are allowed on your corporate network. That is the only way that people should be allowed to use RDP in your network, is through this. This would mitigate this. Now, still you need to fix the problems, you need to patch things, but this will allow that. So let's go to our next. This one is also from Bleeping Computer, and also again our author Bill Toulis. New PHP information stealing malware targets Facebook accounts. I found this new and interesting because of it being PHP code that was related to this. Usually you don't see exploits written in PHP code, but it does kind of make sense since things like Facebook are websites, right? So PHP is a tool. It's an interpreter for a language called PHP that will present its results in the form of a website. So it's a way of coding websites. Windows information stealing malware written in PHP. It is used to steal Facebook accounts, browser data, and cryptocurrency wallets. It is mainly targeting browsers, of course, and focusing on Facebook business accounts. It does act differently. If it finds a Facebook account that is a personal account, it will react differently if it finds a Facebook business account. It connects to a private Telegram channel that acts as a C2 server, so a command and control server. So in that Telegram channel, assuming the threat actor can then type in commands, and your system will listen to those commands. The stolen credentials, if they are successful, they steal your credentials, they're usually used in financial fraud. So how does this get in? Well, it gets in through the usual means. Fake lures. Things like the latest game, a free game, just download here, something your children might click on and get into. Also, those subtitle files, so being able to watch a video and have a subtitle come up. Also, adult videos, of course, sketchy websites. Cracked Microsoft Office applications, again, sketchy websites. It comes in zip file format, and it can come across file sharing, legitimate file hosting services. So there's a zip file in there from a legitimate hosting provider that, of course, could be some level of trust there. Once it's in, it creates a file in the %local app data % directory under packages and pxt. In there, you'll find a php.exe if you're infected. It achieves persistence by adding scheduled tasks to the host so that it can execute daily to make sure it's running at regular intervals. In this latest campaign, using this particular malware, it is using Facebook users, and it also includes regular users. Before, it was only business accounts. Now it is any account, any Facebook account. At this point, it reacts differently. In other words, if it finds a business account, it'll act differently. It'll fetch additional information, payment methods, amounts spent, owner details, verification statuses, PayPal addresses, and such. To this article, I would like to say this is more of on the user to a degree. Be watchful with things like instant messages on LinkedIn. Look out for file downloads. Look out for cracked software, game mods, and cheats from suspicious websites and adult videos. There you go. Lessons learned, right? Let's move to the next article. This one is also Bleeping Computer. Same author, Bill Toulis. Over 45,000 VMware ESXi servers just reached end of life. Now, what's a VMware ESXi server? Well, it's if you, for free, want to play with VMware, you can. You can go to VMware, you can download a version of the ESXi server, and it will download in a way that you can create a downloadable or a bootable media, and then you can boot a computer off of this. And if that computer can run VMware, you can now install VMware on it. And once you've done that, you can connect to it via its administrative console, and there you can start to create virtual machines. So these virtual machines are over there running on your VMware server. And this software, given it's free, it doesn't come with any professional services, so it's not going to sit there and constantly update itself. You, as the person who installed it, are on the hook for actually going out and upgrading it. So upgrading is it tends to be non-destructive, but as always, you need backups, right? So back up your computer, perform an update, put in the new version, and try to do an install over the previous version. So that's what you would try to do. Try to do to keep up with it, right? Do your best, right? Out of these 45,000, let's go through the numbers here. So there's 45,654 VMware ESXi servers. Those are the ones that are reaching end of life as of today, which today was the time this article was written, which I think it was October 15th. So October 15th, VMware ESXi 6.5 and 6.7 are end of life. They will receive no more technical support and no more security updates. So no more protection from vulnerabilities. Out of 6,000 customers, they found 79,000 that have these VMware servers installed. And going through the numbers here, many of them had 6.7. Many other, less amount had 6.5. So in total, there was 45,654. So this puts these and your infrastructure at elevated risk. It's time to do a scan on your enterprise network and see if these can be dealt with. Really, you should be, if you're in an enterprise network, you should run the enterprise version. So ESXi is, like I said, the free version that people can download and get a server running. You're probably running vSphere in an enterprise, and so you can do this a little easier. Granted, it's your mileage may vary there, but these are. It's important to keep these also up to date, which are these the free versions that you install here and there. Doing testing or in your lab environments or whatever. Keep these up to date. It's just striking that so many are now end of life starting today. So starting today, no more security patches. As they get older and older, it's just higher and higher and higher risk for each one of these you have installed in your environment. Ultimately, my conclusion to this is patch and monitor. Moving to the next one. This is an article from Ars Technica, and it is by Dan Gooden. How a Microsoft blunder opened millions of PCs to potent malware attacks. And this is something that Microsoft has always done, but we really need to keep holding their feet to the fire and saying, fix this. This is a common exploit. It is using a feature / security feature. I'm not sure what exactly you'd call it, but it's basically allowing drivers to be loaded into Microsoft, but they're compromised. So how do you fix that? Well, if you were Microsoft, you would say, let's put signatures on all of the known vendors of all of these updates and drivers coming in, right? But what if one becomes infected? Well, if it's vulnerable to attack. In other words, you've upgraded your NVIDIA driver, but the old one was vulnerable. All I would have to do to infect your system would be to first get you to downgrade your driver back to the vulnerable version. Then I could attack. And Microsoft will not get in the way. That's the problem. So at that point, I can now bypass Windows kernel protections, and I'm right in. So as this gets worse and worse, Microsoft, to me, is on the hook for this. They need to fix this. They need to be able to say that vulnerable version of that old software that you're about to move to is not allowed. Unless, of course, you go through many are you sure's types of messages. It's been plaguing us for the last decade. This thing has. Think about all the Dell drivers that come with your system, all the buggy installations that have to happen, all the sys files, all of the things that you have to do to get your system up to date when you reset it. For example, I need to upgrade my video drivers, right? So what do? You go out and get the latest one. What if you didn't get the latest one? What if you just kept the old one and just kept putting it on? You would eventually be vulnerable. So these need to be fixed. Microsoft needs to be able to stop you and say, that's the old driver. You need to put on the new one. And to either stop you or make sure you know what you're doing. So that's all I'll say about this. Microsoft needs to do better. That's what it comes down to. Especially given their market share. The next article. It is from Creative Block, and it's by an author, Daniel Piper. I'm already terrified of the Meta Quest Pro, and I agree with this guy. I am terrified. So, what is it? Well, what is the Quest? Right? It's a It's a VR headset. So now it used to be called Oculus. Now it's called MetaQuest. MetaQuest Pro, technically. So it's a headset. You put it on your head, and it offers you a mixed reality of sorts. Offers you the ability to be able to see or engage in content or games that is in a new way. So now you're in the metaverse when you put it on. It offers a lot of features. It went from the old price of, I guess it was about $300 to $500. Now it is up to $1,500. Oddly enough, I find this interesting because you could have, instead of paying the $300 to $500 on the old Oculus Quest, you could have bought the professional version instead of the user version, and you paid the same price, $1,500. What you would get is that it was not connected to Facebook. So the $300 to $500 version always connected to Facebook. So now your $1,500 version is connecting to Facebook. And of course, it is doing something that is disturbing. And here is the crux of it. So take a look here. Meta says that eye tracking uses cameras to estimate the direction of where your eyes are looking. This feature is used to make your avatar's eye contact and facial expressions look more natural during your virtual interactions with other users, and to improve the image quality within the area where you are looking in VR. Great. It helps Meta personalize your experience. What does that sound like, kids? It sounds like ads. And here is what we already know. Here is what they already do. It's easy and terrifying to imagine how eye tracking could be used for advertising. It's no secret that social media platforms, and I would add the word already, collect data such as how long a user looks at a post before scrolling past it. Is it a stretch to imagine Meta collecting data on which ads or parts of ads or other things that your eyes are drawn to? So I don't mean to paint a dystopian picture in your head, but let's just tell a story. Let's say that you have a bad habit and you're trying to do better. Is your MetaQuest Pro helping you with that bad habit? For example, let's say you're trying to do better about not looking at certain websites or looking at certain pictures, and you're trying to do better. This product is working against you. It's working against you. So here you are trying to improve your behavior, and Meta and this product are working against you. And you're paying even more for it. Just something to think about. Moving on. EDUCAUSE highlighted this. It was from the EDUCAUSE website. The author of this article is Mike Korn. He is the Chief Information Officer at UC San Diego. So good to see somebody in the academic space, especially academic tech space. But the article title is CyberSecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0, what it means for higher education. So there is a security certification and maturity model called CMMC 2.0. There was one called 1.0. It was very much based on do this, then do this, then do this, very steps oriented. And the CMMC 2.0 is a direct response to that. So what does it mean? Well, it moved from things like external assessments, which were very difficult and expensive, to internal assessments, which were often more helpful and also less expensive. And you can do them as many times as you want. A new change in the 2.0 also, it points to things like best effort policies rather than reinventing the wheel. So it points to guidelines like NIST and DoD standards, and takes advantage of classifications that you've probably already made in your environment. You've already have classified data, right? So it just takes advantage of those. So now you can just put the language on top of it, right? So anything you already call private or encrypted or whatever, however you want to separate your data out, it encourages you to engage with those stakeholders, and it fosters that communication. For example, with researchers and staff. So cybersecurity becomes, rather than being a set of regulations, it's a living, breathing program that exists to help people. It uses a principled approach using best practices and reality, things that work, systems that are already designed and deployed and made successfully. So a successful security program would impact people's behavior and thinking, and so that is what the CMMC2 takes advantage of. Now the CMMC1, it kind of approached cybersecurity differently. It was a set of rules. You need to adhere to these rules and give it some thought, and we also need the bureaucracy in place to be able to deal with these things. CMMC 2.0 is more principles. So that basically gives you the gist of what cyber professionals are always trying to say, right? We always try to say, all we can ever do is best practices. We can use a principled approach, best practices. Sorry, I had to clear a screen. It's good to see this in the academic space, doing the best they can, of course, to be able to produce an environment that is secure. Moving to the next one. Oh, that was the same one. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Okay. So here, this isn't an article. This is a YouTuber. His name is Colin Kelly, and the title of his little video essay is 5 Things I Wish I Knew Before Cybersecurity. I assume he means getting into cybersecurity. In other words, 5 things I wish I knew before getting into cybersecurity. Of course, YouTube limits what you can do with the title there, so he points out 5 things that are they're sort of interesting to me because I don't know how many years he's got, but I'm going to guess down in the 5 years range. And here I am with 30, and I frequently associate with other people that have 30. So, we could easily fill a room that would have 100 to 150 years of experience in cybersecurity. We can easily do that with less than a handful of people. And so here's a young guy with maybe just a couple of years or thinking about getting into cybersecurity. What do you need to know? What would you tell your younger self? And I think he does a great job at answering that question. There's a couple of things I would like to comment on about it. One thing I thought his first item was fairly obvious. He basically says you can't learn everything there is to know. Well, of course, you can't learn everything there is to know. If you talk to a nurse, is the nurse getting into it because they immediately want to learn everything they can know in nursing, and then they go practice? No. That's not what a nurse would think. That's not what an architect would think, is I'm going to be continuing to learn as I go. And cybersecurity is no different. So, yes, be ready to hit the ground running toward research materials and books and people that are more experienced with you and mentors and cybersecurity events that happen around you. Vendors can also be a source of education. The second thing he points out is there's no one course that will teach you everything. Be persistent. Of course, take in anything you can. Also be aware of the quality of those things. That's the whole reason that I'm doing what I'm doing here today, is I'm trying to put out some kind of quality content that those that are interested in cybersecurity can plug into and get at least an idea of what's going on. And maybe should I learn more about it, or is it for me? A third thing, I don't know if I lack understanding about what he's talking about or not, but the third thing he points out is avoid jumping between topics. Focus on actually learning one thing at a time. I would agree However, your workflow is not going to support that. So you're going to come in every day and someone else is going to set what your agenda is. So that would be nice that you wanted to focus on, exfiltration, data exfiltration today, but you're not. You're going to focus on something else. You're going to rewrite those firewall rules that you've been meaning to get to because they're now important today. So you don't necessarily get to say that. I guess personally, maybe you can have that kind of focus, but often people that are in the cybersecurity, they do it for work and it stops at 5 p.m. And unless you want to sacrifice other things personally, you need to be prepared to do whatever it is today. I would add to this that you need to try to get good at a particular aspect of it. Specialize. So if you want to specialize in data exfiltration, because that's what makes you excited, then that makes sense. So in other words, instead of this avoiding jumping between topics and learning one thing at a time, understand which area you really want to get into. And maybe your first year you don't know that. Maybe even 5 years in, you finally figured out, hey, I really like data exfiltration or physical security or cyber or encryption. I love encryption. So you want to specialize maybe on encryption. You'll know that at some point. And at that point, it is not a bad thing to go ahead and learn all you can about that one topic. Understanding that even as a 30-year veteran today, I am not an expert at any one thing. I do have what I consider myself probably the resident expert, depending on who's in the room. I could be the expert at this particular topic today. For example, host security. I am good with Linux. I'm good with server security. So I've specialized in that, but am I an expert? That's a stretch. Even with 30 years on my belt, I call that a stretch to call myself an expert. So I'm sorry, but you're just not going to be that. That's not going to be you. So I would add that to his third thing. The fourth thing he says is just Google it. Don't get stuck on problems and waste time. I would also agree there that you probably need to set a limit on things. I was listening to another YouTuber, and it was more about a legal issue, but he was working on a problem as part of it, and he had to stop working on it because his policies at his work outlined that they cannot work on the same problem for more than 4 hours. This was basically a hardware issue. It was like a motherboard problem. And he couldn't get stuck on the motherboard and just keep banging away at it for more than 4 hours. In other words, his policy says, stop. Call the motherboard bad, get a new one. And I thought that was interesting, and that is an interesting approach. That if you're stuck on a particular problem, I would say be careful when you Google, because Google is, of course, Google. It's going to be a trash trove or treasure trove of information. So you're going to have to find that needle in a haystack to get past the problem. I would say you're almost better at doing a tiered approach to it. For example, is there a vendor that you can hold to the fire to say, fix this problem? That would be your first hurdle to get over. If they can't fix it, or if you're waiting on them and looking at other things, well, look at something else. Look for strategies of mitigation, maybe next, because you'll often find yourself trying to mitigate something rather than being able to go ahead and make a change in your network. Because you could possibly not be able to make that change for a while, maybe until that next patch time or the next patch Tuesday or whatever. So learn how to summarize and say, the problem really comes into this attack vector. Okay, change the attack vector. Make it so that no one can use that attack vector for the foreseeable future. Then you've not corrected the problem, but you've mitigated it, and you can move on. Now you can spend more time later on it. So sure, use those references, Google it, whatever. But I would say add that tiered approach. Try your vendors. Ask somebody that is more experienced. Do a little networking. Go to your network. Go to your Indeed network and say, or your LinkedIn network and say, who do I know that does this at their financial institution or academic institution or whatever, and say, have you seen this? What would you do? That's often the case. Also, any friendships you've made with people in law enforcement or at trade shows or whatever, those are also in that tiered approach somewhere. Ultimately, sure, you can Google it. His fifth thing is get started now. Don't wait for the future date to start learning. I would agree. Get started. How would you get started, though? I'm not sure he detailed it too well. I would say volunteer. Maybe ask people that you know that are in the business. If you can do an internship, even an internship for the day, maybe even just not one that's official. Just go in and say, hey, I'll do this work for you if you'll show me your cybersecurity policies. Walk me through them. Tell me how they work. So that way I can just kind of, get an idea of what's out there. Or get a really good idea of what the work is like day to day. Tell me about your day, a day in the life of a cybersecurity engineer or whatever. Go exploring like that. All right. So that concludes the news we've got. So let's talk about. Let's go to our how-to education part. So what I'd like to do here is talk about a continuation of what we did last time. So what we did last time is we went through 1.1.1 of the security domains, right? So the security domain I would like to touch on now is the same security domain. It is security and risk management, and underneath ethics, it's the next point underneath that. Now, some people organize this a little differently, but last time I covered protect society. This time I'm going to say I'm going to cover the subject understand and apply security concepts. So this goes back to what our friend Colin Kelly did on his 5 things he wished he knew about cybersecurity. A little bit of that, because that means you have to learn. You have to understand and apply security concepts. You have to learn them. So this involves what controls there are. For example, you have administrative controls, technical controls, and physical controls. What are they? What does that mean? What does it mean you have a control in something? Well, a control means that I can make changes to this application. I can make changes to this process by just twisting some knobs. In other words, let's say an exploit is available for our app. Well, what can we do to mitigate it? Well, we can tell everyone, please don't click on that. That would be an administrative control, right? You just tell everyone, don't click on that. But how good is that going to be? You can have a technical control, which could say, well, when a person clicks on it, they get an error page. Okay, so that's a technical control to say you can't click on that. A technical control will pop up and say stop or stop you. So it's a technical solution that you put in place to keep people from doing something. There's also a physical control. Physical controls are things like physical locks on doors, physical locks on cabinets, things of that nature. So we have a physical control that prevents people from being able to do things to our stuff, right? So that's what that is. Anytime you turn the knobs on these controls, you're either raising or reducing risk. So that's what those knobs are. Other things that are security concepts are things like strategy, tactics, operations. What is a tactic? What is a strategy? Well, you might centralize your operations, right? You might centralize your security or information technology. And the way you do that is you'd put things like your central VPN. Well, you'd put that in a data center and you'd protect it, right? And that's typically what people do, right? So that's what you're talking about. You're talking about best practice. What people typically do, right? So you connect your central VPN to your radius server, and then you allow people to connect through a proxy, or they can maybe go through a bastion host, and then they can get further and further down into the layers of the security. These things change over time, and that's where I get to Colin Kelly's point, which is that these models change over time. See, we're constantly learning. We used to think of layers like an onion, like there was silos and segregation. The old DMZ concept, where you've got your things that are most sensitive, like databases, and your data, it's at the center layer. And then there's an application layer outside of that. The application layer doesn't store the data. The data is all stored in the inside layer. And then the application layer is used by the outside layer, which is the web piece, like the public piece, the apps, the website. They poke at the applications, and the applications will go in and get the data for you. So we used to think of these layers like that. It also means thinking about the CIA triad. That is something that you will see a lot if you go into the CISSP security domains essentials. Is you're going to see the three things, the triad. Confidentiality is the CIA. So confidentiality, that is where you do things like you're training people against social engineering tactics. You're deciding that maybe we shouldn't use external media. We shouldn't allow USB keys. We want to prevent people from eavesdropping. We put up higher walls, cubicle walls. We separate booths so that people doing things can be separated. We put separations between ATM machines. So things like that. There's also the I in CIA, that's integrity. It has to do with things like digital certificates. Can we prove the data is accurate? And not only do we deliver the data, but is it accurate? Was it encrypted? Was it stored in a way where we know that the data is correct? We have backups, that sort of thing. So the next thing is the CIA triad is the A, which is availability. Availability has to do with single points of failure. So you want to think about how available is your information? How available is the data? Can you get to it in a timely manner? Is it reliable? Can you reliably access the data? Are there these single points of failure that would cause it to be knocked offline easily? What is your backup strategy? Can you if everything goes down, can you restore in a timely manner? So there's availability. You always want to keep that triad engaged in your mind, and until that changes. Maybe we'll learn some other triad later, but right now it's the CIA triad, and it's been that way for 10 plus years, maybe even 20. There are also things like best practices that you need to learn. Those are concepts and very useful to understand them. Things like separation of duties, rotation of duties. You want to rotate a person out every once in a while so that they're not working on that. They're not responsible for that, and someone else is. That way they can catch and say, hey, that last person that was here, they did this. They put this script in here, and took advantage of something. You also want to know core concepts like least privilege. Does a person have the least amount of privileges they need to get to the information they need? You want to make things on a need-to-know basis. You also want to have dual control. In other words, no one can bring the system down without the permission of two people. The dual control type of thing. You really want to study the concepts of risk analysis. How many times does that risk occur? How valuable is the asset? What could we possibly lose here? That is my nice little cyber kitty talking. I don't know if you can hear him or not, but he is going nuts. With that, I would also like to talk about a website or tool of the week. Things that I consider interesting. Things that I've liked, like particular projects or ideas or tools, I guess, that I have found to be useful. So where is it? I should have brought it up in its own little storage thing, but I did not. Why did I not? Give me one moment. One moment. Do, 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 do. Well, perhaps I have lost it. That is too bad. Well, I will point out two websites that are sort of interesting, and they're only interesting in, I guess, an edge case. So let me put them up here, and I will show you them. Now, the edge case I'm talking about is the edge case of, let's say you're using the new technology that Apple is using, and it is the M1s and M2s. I'm sure you've heard of them, so let's go to that. Let me pull up that. Okay, here are two of the things that I have found most useful when I've been working with my M1s and M2 customers and my own computer, is to understand what apps are available. So here is a database of the various applications that could be available for the Windows machines and also Mac machines. And the question is, well, is that working on the ARM processor yet, the M1 or M2? So let's say you have a question about a particular game or a particular product or whatever. Let's say Microsoft Word. So is Microsoft Word available for ARM? Yes, it is full native Apple Silicon support as of version 16.44. So I find this website very interesting. It's very telling. So if you're curious about your Apple support people, like whatever you're supporting in Apple, like maybe you're supporting a particular department that's an Apple department, or they have a lot of Macs. This has been very valuable because it's called doesitarm.com, doesitarm.com, and what it does is it shows you how and where and particular applications are supported. It also has games. So let's type CSGO. So is CSGO on the new MacBook? Is it available? Can you do it? So here is an article about that. Is it possible? Can you do it?
So I've had a heap of people ask me what gaming is like on the new...
There you go. So take you to this. What about something else? Let's look at another game. Civilization. Okay. So Civilization. What's the latest Civilization? I thought it was Civilization 7. Oh, there's a Beyond Earth. So let's do 6. Okay. Civilization 2. Or 6, I mean. So here we go. So it just tells you what, if it's supportable, right? So can you run Civilization with your M1 Apple Silicon? So this answers those questions. It also takes you to some nice tools, benchmarks. One thing I find very helpful is Homebrew. Homebrew is a way of putting useful programs that are available on things like Linux, and makes it available to you under the Mac architecture. Just click on games. I wonder what they say here. Okay, so it's basically in alphabetical order. So you can go to alphabetical order and look to see if your game is here. If the game you want to play is here. There's a very similar website, and it is called isappleSiliconReady.com. So here is a similar website that does basically the same thing. So if you type in like Civilization, might be worth checking both. I don't know. So Civilization. Did I spell it right? Civilization. I don't know. Let's type Microsoft Word. See if we can get that. Yep, there it is. Okay, Microsoft Word. So it'll tell you, does it work on that? And it says, yes. Version 16.45. So actually, it has a different data. The other one said 16.44. As of 16.44, it does it. This one says 16.45. So different result. So these are two basically real-world results on how these apps are functioning on the Mac platform. So if you support Macs, if you use Macs, these two websites are helpful. See if I can make them both available here. DoesItArm.com and IsAppleSiliconReady.com. So those two, between those two, you should probably be able to figure out with some minimal research whether the particular application you're working with is going to work for you. So anyway, I hope those web tools work for you, and I hope that's been useful. So that puts episode 2 in the history books. I do thank you for paying attention, even if it's later, that you've been able to catch me on YouTube or whatever. Please comment. Please like my video. Please also subscribe. I have a lot more subscribers on Twitch for some reason, but that's good. Either one's good. If you want to get me live, I try to do this every Thursday, and it's typically about 3 to 4, somewhere around there, depending on when my writing gets done. And I try to do it as on a Thursdays. So come and see me on Twitch for a live version, and that way I'll be sitting here looking at your comments. If you comment, I can chat with you. We can talk about things as they come up. We can maybe even discuss some of the things live if you'd like. So I invite your commentary as far as that goes. And anyway, with that, I thank you very much for your attention. So please keep your friends and family safe. If you're the technical guy, if you're the cybersecurity expert in your family, please keep the technology around you up to date. Keep your parents, grandparents, and loved ones safe, and keep at it. It is worth it. So with that, I bid you goodbye.